Sound design is an incredibly creative craft, and there's no single right way to build a soundscape for a film, whether narrative, documentary, video essay, or social content. The term sound designer covers two different roles. If the cinematographer is responsible for what ends up on screen, the sound designer is responsible for how the film sounds. The other definition of a sound designer is someone whose specific job is inventing brand new sounds. We'll see both definitions at work across our 4 different approaches to film sound. Castaway, starring Tom Hanks, was sound designed by Randy Thom. There's a separate set of DVD featurette videos that's worth watching, where Tom talks through his choices for the sound of the island and the film as a whole. It's fascinating because his sound design is built almost entirely around thematic ideas: isolation, being alone on the island, the hero's need to escape, and eventually the disappointment of returning to a world that's moved on without him. Sorry for that spoiler alert. According to Tom, the real goal of sound design is to not be noticed. Every choice supports the visuals, the character, the theme, and ultimately the story. The moment an audience becomes consciously aware of the sound, they're being pulled out of the story, the opposite of the goal. He builds his choices around the character and how they feel, emphasizing the hero, maintaining the emotional through line, and building out the environment, all components that support the story. Every sound designer we look at in the 4 different unique approaches work towards that same principle. Walter Murch is known as an editor, but he's also one of the most accomplished sound designers in cinema's history. In fact, he was the first person credited with the title of sound designer for Apocalypse Now. Murch's sound design approach focuses on real-world and natural sounds. His craft focuses on the placement of sounds to emphasize character. His process starts with his own spotting session, going through the film and identifying every sync and non-sync sound that wasn't captured in the production track. Then he asks 2 questions. Is it necessary, and is it effective? Necessary means that it's a vital component to the character or the environment. Effective means, out of the practically infinite ways any given sound could be rendered, which specific version does the most for this character and for the exact moment? In this Godfather scene, necessary sounds include a door closing, paper rustling, bed sheets, and the bullets through the window, as well as footsteps. But necessary sounds lead to an effective choice. A door closing could be a myriad of different doors, frames, hinges, and weights. Footsteps imply so many different kinds of shoes on different surfaces, worn by people with different footfalls and weight. The footsteps we hear towards the end of the scene aren't generic. These are Italian gangsters who only wear expensive, hard-soled shoes. Their footstep sounds carry information about who they are. The footsteps are necessary because we see them on screen, but they are effective because they tell us more about the character than just a random squeaky shoe would. As a matter of fact, that squeaky shoe would tell us something very different about the characters. So there's always going to be an effective result, no matter what your choice is. Your job is to choose the sound that is going to be most effective for the story. Murch's job is to choose the one version that best serves the character.
Okay, good. Weird.
For example, the wide shot where Michael pulls his wife off the bed to protect her, the camera stays distant, but the heavy breathing pulls us in close to their panic and fear despite the framing. The sound of them breathing is necessary, but Murch's choice how the sound is represented makes it much more effective. Murch thinks of sound in layers: foreground, midground, and deep background, always filtering every layer through the necessary and effective sounds, pulling the audience into the character's world and emphasizing their moment. Listen to the way the music leads to a crescendo when Michael realizes the curtains are open so that someone can get a clear shot at him.
Michael, why are the drapes open?
Frank Serafine's credits include early Star Trek films and both Tron films, The Addams Family, and Hunt for Red October, for which he won an Academy Award. Where Murch is the first kind of sound designer overseeing the whole soundscape, Frank Serafine is closer to our second definition as someone who invents new sounds, in his case using synthesizers and computers. He isn't after a literal recording that represents the visual. For Serafine, he's designing a unique sound that captures the essence of the visual, almost like an auditory metaphor. The Fog was directed by John Carpenter in 1978. It's about a pirate ghost ship that emerges from a fog bank to terrorize a coastal town.
Hey, there's a fog bank out there.
The fog doesn't normally make a sound, but Serafine builds a rising synthesized swell that accompanies the fog bank as it approaches, giving it an auditory presence appropriate to this supernatural B-movie. You also hear a synthesized clash, an impact sound layered into the violence later in the clip. None of these sounds are trying to pass as real, but they don't call attention to themselves as fake either. They emphasize the nature of what's on screen without breaking the internal logic of the story. They also create a fantastic or fantasy-based effect for the visual.
Who is that?
If you've seen a classic Walt Disney film, you've heard Jimmy McDonald's sound work. He's arguably the most influential sound designer in film history because of how early and how foundational his approach was. Since animated cartoons have no real-world sound to record, McDonald had to invent everything. His method was to physically build devices and props that could be played like instruments, timed exactly to match the animated action on screen.
This is a rain machine. I have it just loaded in there with little finishing nails, nailed all on strips, and then a couple hands full of Mexican peas. And by rotating it slowly, you'll get the rain sound.
The Disney style leaned into the use of musical sound effects. A wall impact might be a cymbal clash or a timpani drum. A character zipping across frame might get a whistle or flute. Part of this was aesthetic, and part of it was practical when early recording equipment was too bulky to take out onto location, so the studio had to simulate everything in-house, using instruments and contraptions they could control and use again in different films.
And then get some high-pitched squeaks by getting close.
Sound designer Ben Burtt filmed a tour of Disney Imaginary sound designer Joe Harrington's preserved collection of Jimmy McDonald's original devices, worth watching in full, an added film to the DVD collection of WALL-E. A few highlights: the drawbridge chains repurposed as machine gun sounds, an actual screen door opening that they could bring into the studio, a wind machine for full controllable gusts, something called a thunder sheet, a piece of sheet metal that produced this rich, low-frequency rumble. Ben Burtt was a USC student when George Lucas needed some sample sounds recorded to help pitch his Star Wars movie to studio executives. Burtt did such a good job that Lucas hired him to sound design the entire film, and then he went on to a long career that included the Indiana Jones films with Steven Spielberg, among many, many other iconic films. His approach is to record real-world sounds in unexpected ways and then combine these sounds together until they lose their direct association with the source. This gave his sounds a fantastic, exaggerated quality suited for the genres he was sound designing. A few of his famous solutions: Star Wars laser blasts are sounds of Burtt hitting a radio tower guide wire with a hammer, mic to capture the metallic echoing ring. The Imperial Walkers combine recordings of industrial machine punches and bicycles being dropped onto concrete. R2-D2 blends Burtt's own voice with early synthesizers, similar to Serafine's earlier approach. And the boulder chasing Indiana Jones at the start of Raiders of the Lost Ark is Bert's own Honda Civic station wagon with the engine off, coasting in neutral down his driveway, mic close to the tires. The opening sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark is full of sound effects that are clearly not literal recordings of what's happening on screen. The birds, the dart hitting the wood, the skeleton, the blow darts, the body hitting the ground. Plane starting at the end. The plane at the end is kind of a fun detail. It's the exact same recording of the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. An intentional and kind of inside joke. So the four approaches lead us to a practical lesson. Walter Murch used real sounds, necessary and effective, and placed them to emphasize the character's moment. Frank Serafine used synthesized sounds to mimic the visuals. Jimmy McDonald built physical devices to create cartoon effects, and Ben Burtt recorded and combined ordinary sounds in unusual ways to create something that felt bigger and more fantastic than reality. You'll land on a blend of all four, developing your own approach. The through line across every one of these approaches is the same. They build a consistent sonic world of a film's reality, always in service of the story and never calling attention to itself. Run sounds in your own project through Murch's necessary and effective filter first. Where nothing quite real captures what the moment needs, don't hesitate to build or synthesize something like Serafine or McDonald. Look for opportunities to repurpose and combine sounds to enhance reality, remembering that sound doesn't have to literally match their sources. Hold on to Randy Tom's rule. If the audience notices the sound rather than following the story, pull it back. You'll learn where to find that fine line.